we're a big presence on campus, sometimes a little too big, because I think we're loud and pushy and messy. But the point is that, I guess back to your question, then the next thing is that we are fortunate to recently have a federal grant to expand our graduate programs because we're a Hispanic serving institution. And one of the things that the grant brought to us was Catherine Roussel, who is our career outreach person who serves both architecture and interior architecture. And she has been really focusing on, well, there was one event called Meet the Design Firms, but she also organizes trips through our AIAS chapter to design firms or to job sites. And so I think we're really trying to kind of like choreograph that through her. Plus, when I started, I worked with the faculty, or I asked that the faculty could help the students, the faculty advisors could help the students to create an academic plan, which is a way to look at the curriculum and plan their way through the curriculum. And it occurred to me when Catherine Roussel arrived that we should also be creating a professional plan that's parallel to that. So the professional plan question is, where do you want to be after Woodbury? So then what does that have to do with the classes you're taking? And what sort of firm do you want to work in? Do you want to work in a firm? Maybe you want to open a restaurant. We know some people who have restaurants. So, we can so there's that kind of thing. The fact is that these days, less than 50% of architecture graduates are actually in what we would call a traditional practice. Maybe that's part of the economy, but I also think it's part of our tools that we have, that give students these other options of being creative and finding the thing that gets them excited to get up in the morning. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
Yeah.
What's your next question?
You've had a practice yourself for a number of years, and you've done a lot of exploratory and interesting work. What your thoughts about your own practice? Have that informed your ideas of dean within the program in a particular way?
Well, yes. I had a practice, and it was just, for a while, it was just, trying to get jobs with clients and doing whatever I could to get them to pay me and try to do a really good job and, try to get them, try to get it submitted for an award or whatever. But as I got deeper in, I never really assumed that when I moved here with my former firm A to Z, which I started before I started architect, Sheila Klein and Reese Nemi, we were just gonna like tear the world up. The world was our whatever. So then I got invited to teach at Art Center, and Frank Israel invited me to teach a little at UCLA, and then I was invited to teach, because we wanted a record house, I was invited to teach at USC. And I realized that I loved teaching because I could sort of turn my passion for architecture towards these students and share it with them. And in a way, that the idea was that maybe you could actually multiply the amount of good architecture if you actually talk to other people about it and teach them. So it was at a certain point, and I think I see Sarah Graham here. I started at USC the same time Marc Angelou started, and he was full-time and I was part-time. And I used to love to see the way he would take a kind of large site and assign students different pieces of the grid and give them each a specific set of weird hybrid of a strange program. And then ask them to figure out a way to put it all together. And the way that he got them to make these beautiful axonometric drawings, and this was a little before the computer became so prevalent, and then make these lovely models that just sort of went together. And I was so impressed with that I started actually getting students to try to emulate his way of drawing in my second year classes. And then it was so clear to me because I always called them elemental drawings, where you do an axonometric of just the circulation scheme and the windows, or or one of just the structural scheme and something else. And so they were really, really beautiful. And it occurred to me at a certain point, just about the time I left USC for SCIAR, that why don't I design this way? You know, like, I just sit down and I start drawing these things, but like, what if I did these sort of elemental drawings, you know, that are...
Like you were teaching your students.
Right, and so that was a big, teaching actually, there was a point where I crossed a threshold where teaching actually changed the way I think about my practice, and the way that I drew, and the way that I even like developed systems. And then I was around people like the people I'm with, like Paulette Singley and others, who are pretty rigorous from an academic point of view. And at Woodbury, in order to get reappointed, you have to demonstrate that you're progressing from a kind of scholarly perspective. And so I gave myself a challenge of saying, well, what if I'm going to claim that I have a critical practice. So what does that mean? And so I made the argument in my application for reappointment that I did have a critical practice, and that my own house was an example of that. And the idea was that I looked closely at mini malls when I was teaching at USC, because it was right during the upturn of the, 1992 when the riots were. And we did this thing called the Service Station Project, working with 11 teams. Annie Chu was on one of the teams. There were others, and they all worked in different parts of the city, and this was at the Municipal Art Gallery. But we asked them to go out and do these very light touch, small scale projects. And you know, they could attach themselves to many malls and do all this stuff, because it was a point where we saw the city as being dysfunctional. And so I became to say, you know, I hated mini malls when I got here, but then I started to say, well, you know, they really work. You build a dumb building, maybe it's L-shaped, maybe it's a strip. It has all the same spaces, and there's some electricity and plumbing in each space. You know, what if that was a way to design a house? And so I tried, you were recently at my house, so that's basically the premise of the house. It's 3 same spaces on each floor, and the inhabitant gets to determine what's in it by the way they furnish it. And there's always, like, the electricity and the plumbing is nearby, so you can adjust it. So after I'm gone, someone else can move it in and turn it into fourplex, or move the kitchen downstairs, and is that critical, Paulette? I don't know. So the thing is that my argument was that, and this maybe gets into a question you might have later about autonomy, but
I was going to ask that.
It has to do, like, I feel, I'll lead into that question, you can follow up. The question about autonomy.
You follow up.
I feel like I'm really of the autonomous sort of side of things for the most part, except when it comes, and I feel like my house is really rigorous and it's like very willful, and but at the same time I designed it to kind of address climate change in a subtle way, and also to be flexible, and I designed it to be open-ended so that, like, the next inhabitants can come and change it without really destroying it. And so to me that might start to question the autonomousness of it, because the willfulness of it may be like affected by that. I don't know.
I should probably tell the audience what the question was that he's answering, right? And the question was, we had talked just a little bit about this, and it's something I'm interested in asking each of the deans was, you know, in extremis there are people who talk about architecture as an autonomous endeavor, that it's about itself. Architecture is about architecture. You build a language, it speaks to itself, and you attempt to perfect it. And that's kind of on one end of a conversation. And the other end, in some sense, if there is another end, is that actually it's a language and it's an open process, and it relates to, in a democratic, late democratic culture like we're in, it inevitably involves engaging other conversations and managing that conversation in a way that becomes design. One's porous and maybe one's not too porous, And I think Norman is picking up on that.
But isn't this the root of the debate that was sparked by Christopher Hawthorne's review of the New Sculpturalism show? I mean, in terms of his response to Tom Main's point about, we should be speaking to other architects about what we do, and the hell with everyone else or something. And I actually do think that there's actually room in my world for both sides, and I actually think there's room at Woodbury for both sides. I do think I could name a bunch of faculty like Paul at Singley and Jerry Smulovich and you and Branda and maybe even Nick Roberts and others who are probably on the autonomous side most of the time. And then I could think of some others like Janine Centuri, who's back there, or Hadley and Peter Arnold, or Chrissy Van Cleve and Bill Roshan, or me, or maybe even Ingalill, Walrus Ritter, who are willing to, or Louis Molina, or anyway, so who are willing to kind of like go back and forth and realize that it depends on the individual, it depends on the situation, it depends on if you're talking about urbanism, or if you're talking about a specific piece of architecture from a sculptural or experiential perspective. So, and I actually think we need to teach autonomy still, but actually make sure that the students realize that there are always exceptions to that, and that there. So, I mean, I don't mean to sound wishy-washy about that, but I do think that. I mean, I'm